Welcome to the Happy Dog Podcast. This podcast is designed to bring you ideas and uplifting information to help you live a meaningful and fulfilled life with your dog from a holistic perspective. Now, let's explore the world of a happy dog. This is episode 4 of the Happy Dog Podcast, and I'm here with Billy Hoekman, who is the Nutrition Science Director for Answers Pet Food. He lives in LA with his wife and his cute little pug, and he performs all of Answers Pet Food's nutrition consultations. He's involved with the formulation and research and product development for the company, and he also speaks all around the U.S., all about nutrition for pets and talking about the Answers products, of course. So thank you, Billy, for being on the show.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone, including myself, because I don't know this about you, how you got started with Answers.
Well, I got started, I think in a lot of ways, just like everyone else. So I got a dog, and I needed, the same dog that I have today. She's 12, so she'll turn 13 in August, and which I guess is not even that close. I don't know why. But it's like with kids and dogs, you're like, oh, they'll be 13 in 11 months. I don't know why.
I get it. It's like a kid anyway, so.
Exactly. So, my mind typically focuses on several things like interests. I'm not the type of person who, has like a ton of, I have like 4 interests and I focus on them. I'm kind of obsessed with them. So, her nutrition started to be one of those things. And I started to, I went up the same ladder everyone goes up. And a lot of people don't know this, but I'm, 100% self-taught. And so, I was at the point where I had, knew what I thought, was pretty much everything about every brand that was on the market. I was making all of my own food for that reason because they didn't trust me, any pet food virtually. And I started helping other people with their animals' issues. And I'm sure this story sounds very familiar with people. And I'm the type of person, I think, too, that if I really want something, I'm going to do whatever I can to, get that thing. And so one morning, after finding Answers and not knowing they were a company for about 6 months, one morning I wrote my now boss an email. This was 9 years ago, and said, this is who I am and I love science, and this is who my dog is. And at the end, I still have this email. At the end, it said, and you have to hire me because I can't work for anyone else. And she did.
Yeah.
Not exactly. I mean, I'm the nutrition science director now, and a lot of people say, how did you obtain that position? I just worked my way up through the company. And so I'm, proof positive that, we produce these diets that work. And the reason why we've grown so much over the past 10 years is because, for that simple fact, there's really word of mouth and reversing these health conditions. So I'm proof positive that if you want to know the correct information, the science is the same regardless of who says it. It's sort of like in philosophy, the argument holds water regardless of who actually says it. And so, I feel very fortunate that I went from, being 100% self-taught to we just released our yeast diet, which I wrote, and, that'll be, veterinarians will be implementing that across the country. So I feel very fortunate to be where I'm at.
That's amazing. I love that because, I feel like in the pet food world, it's so driven by you need to go to this school and get this degree. And if you don't have this, you don't know the science behind it. And I actually just had a diabetic client that I'm working with for a homemade diet. Her vet was all upset because she was like, I'm concerned this person doesn't know the science behind the food and how you put it together. And, you don't have to, you have to do your research, obviously. And you've obviously done that and, yes, worked your way up to this. But, you can't wing it. But if you have the passion behind it, like you said, and you really like focus in on it, you can get it down.
I think too, there's different ways to collect information, and all of them have limits. But I really think, the way in which we collect data, we have a huge sample size. I mean, think about in the past 10 years how many dogs we've fed. For instance, we have an AFCO feeding trial that we actually did with Dr. Gene Dodds for our
Mhm.
dog food, right? We have a cat AFCO feeding trial that we did with cats that were in homes. So we can substantiate that claim that way. But, I think an even better way to do that is we haven't been really dealt with any nutritional deficiencies in, 10 years of feeding hundreds of thousands of dogs across the country. And
Mhm.
so when it comes to some of these diets that we develop, I think we have a really good, you know, test size, even though you could, talk about the limitations in not doing, a double blind study or something like that. But the other part about that is, how do you quantify food,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
if you have an animal that has uh, kidney disease, and that animal goes on to a diet that is all raw goat milk and fermented fish stock, and then those kidney numbers come back into regular range, and that dog lives, several years longer. How
Mhm.
do you quantify that? For me, my focus is that dog and that owner,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
If it works, it works. And so um, it just and the other part too is there's always going to be people who disagree with you. There's tons of
Oh, of
people who,
course.
there people will sometimes send me terrible things that people say about me over the internet, because I don't really focus in on um I'm not really a part of like a lot of those like online groups or anything.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's funny, and you kind of have to take it all with a grain of salt and say, not everyone's going to think I'm good at what I do. Not everyone's going to think I am qualified. Not everyone's going to think I'm this or that. You just gotta. Our deal with at Answers Pet Food is to say, we're going to do what we're going to do, and if you don't want to do it, don't.
Yeah. Right. Right. You know that I obviously feed Mila Answers Pet Food, and it's been doing wonders for her with her diabetes, and she's been on homemade diets before, and they worked well at the time. But it's really like, for me, what I've found, and I don't know if you found this too, it's my question for you, but how much does the dog's stage of life really affect their feeding and what you're feeding, and how much you're feeding and all that sort of thing? Because I feel like with Mila's different life stages, I can literally go like in 2 to 3 year pockets of what's really worked for her and how it's changed over time. And right now, in this senior time period for her, Answers has been the best fit. So, in your opinion, and what you've seen with the dogs that you've done these different consultations on and things like that, how much does feeding for a dog's life stage really matter?
Well, I think uh, feeding and genetics, or life stage and genetics, are the two biggest things.
Hmm.
So, your dog starts with, the genetics that they have, and normally a dog's are fighting an uphill battle when it comes to genetics. So they're starting off not great, and that's because, malnourished mother dogs are giving birth to malnourished dogs that give birth to
Hmm.
malnourished. You have, at this point, many, many generations with most dogs that are being born of animals that are, eating processed diets. So you start there, and then you go into feeding. So, whatever life stage they're in and what they've ate up to that point, what they've eaten, sorry, that was a what they've ate,
Uh,
what they've eaten up to that point is going to make a big deal. I remember, and I believe you were at the RNDS, and yeah, you were at RNDS in 2018 in Chicago
mhm.
there. And I remember Dr. Dressler was talking about, who was keynote speaking on cancer, and he made a very good point in saying that cancer is, not just one event; it's a bunch of small injuries that accumulate to being something bigger.
Right. Mhm.
And so, you have these animals that are exposed to the daily environment that animals are exposed to now, and people are in the same boat with a lot of untested products and things that are approved that really shouldn't be. And then you add into that, diets that don't work as much. So
Mhm.
when I work with an animal who's been eating a processed kibble diet for 10 years, there's that puts a limitation on how much you can potentially it potentially puts a limitation on how much you can, reverse the health issue that they're dealing with, or, um, minimize it. Um, but I always tell people too in that regard, don't, the people, someone who doesn't feed their dog correctly doesn't love their dog any less than someone who does. It's just they don't have the right information.
Right.
So, people do the best they can with the information they have. I work with people all the time and say, I wish I would have known this sooner. Well, now that you know it, this is a good time to, we've all been there.
Right.
But so when it comes to that, and actually I believe in October at the Lucas and Berube Health Summit, I'm doing maintenance diets for middle-aged and senior animals. I'm speaking on that because
Mhm.
it certainly changes. And actually, I think we're working on something with that with senior dogs and
Oh,
and
awesome.
and answers products, because all of our health diets are or all the diets in our health guide are based on our current products and putting them in kind of different ratios, as you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so we're kind of working with that, but absolutely. I mean, my dog is 12 and she has no health issues, pretty much. But she was born in a puppy mill, and she was born with a luxating patella that has not been an issue because of nutrition. But as she gets older, I've started doing, for instance, double the amount of fermented fish stock every single day,
Mm. Mhm.
just to maintain her joints better, because I've seen that be the single best product I've seen, in our case, that's been able to maintain joints. So it definitely changes from, young dog that can just basically do a maintenance diet to, I'm starting to see symptoms. I need to initiate, you
Mhm.
know, doing protecting the joints, or protecting the liver or the kidney, or whatever, into senior, where you start to get into some more extreme values. Um, but I would say the number one and two, or I would say the number one thing that people notice is joints. So that's something you can really have an effect on. I mean, you can reverse a lot of those conditions just by maintaining a good weight and feeding, um, you know, copious amounts of bone broth in the
Mm.
diet. And then the second part is, the other thing that I see is like the Achilles heel of most dogs is either cancer and or elimination organ issues, so like liver and kidney. And for me, it's like, as your dog gets older, the more you can fit into that 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio, and put less stress on your dog's elimination organs, the better. And
Right.
also, in my experience, the more fermented raw dairy as they get older, the better.
Mhm. Mhm. And so we'll talk about the fermented stuff in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of switch a little bit to talk about one of the things that I'm super impressed with when it comes to answers and the food that you produce for dogs. I mean, it's so much more high quality than a lot of human food out there. But it's because of the sustainable farming and how transparent you all are with ingredients. And it was, I think, at this last Dogs Naturally conference where one of the lines that stuck with me the most that you said was how we're ruining food
Hmm.
and basically farming. So, can you, give everybody more info on the farms that Answers works with and how sustainability is so, I mean, it's like, could you say it's like the foundation of what makes your food that great too?
Yeah, and I actually am very glad you asked that. I have a really good story about that. So it's the we're able to do things that no other company can do, and it's because of the relationship we have with our farmers. So,
Mhm.
like, if we need duck eggs, we're not gonna go and buy duck eggs from someone. We're gonna start a duck egg farm, right?
Mm. Yeah.
That it so we can determine the quality of. We're gonna say, okay, we know this guy and he wants to raise ducks for us. Now we can visit the farm. We know, and we set the standards by which those things are raised. But the story I'm going to tell is about chicken, because
Okay.
chicken kind of gets a bad rap.
Oh, for
Chicken meat,
sure.
right? A
Yeah.
lot of people don't use it. So this will illustrate pretty well exactly the quality that's going into your food, which is totally unobtainable by the average person. So,
Mhm.
and it also shows how we've gotten better over the years.
Mm.
So we started in our chicken formula using what was better than the industry standard at the time, which is GAP, which is a Global Animal Partnership rated
Mm-hmm.
uh, 3 and 4 chickens. These were not certified organic at the time, and that's still, as good or better than, for instance, the chicken you can buy at Whole Foods or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, then we eventually moved into that standard plus all certified organic, which made us the best in the industry um, for that standard. Then we said to ourselves, okay, we want to have more control. We want to raise these chickens, and more specifically, we want to slaughter and process these chickens in a specific way. So we started raising our own chickens. So right now in our chicken formula, the chickens we get from other people. So at 25% right now are raised by us. We're actually working on 100% in the
That's
future.
awesome.
We've worked on a way to do that. Um, so 75% of those are organic, gap rated chickens that are pasture raised. This is the best chicken you could possibly buy. But what a lot of people don't know is when you buy chicken from the grocery store, even if it's the best chicken you've ever bought, if you that goes through a USDA plant. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens is, in order to do their safety protocol, they're doing like a myriad of chemical washes on that chicken.
Yeah.
So this is the best you can buy at a store. So if you were to go to buy the best chicken you could possibly buy, it still goes through that myriad of chemical washes. So what we do that's much different than that is our chickens, which are the whole chickens that go into our chicken formula, which are the head and the feet. I mean, we basically take the feathers off, save the organs, take some of the innards out, and you get the head and the feet, which is obviously a very high nutritional value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those chickens are walked over to Levi's barn. Levi has a processing section of his barn, and those chickens are processed in that barn, and they only go through a whey wash. There's no chemical washing of those chickens. So we only wash them with whey to inhibit the growth of pathogens, and that product does not exist on the market. That is better than literally anything a human could buy in any store in America.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. That's
and that's
amazing.
what, yeah, and that's what we're moving more towards. And so, um, these are the things that, we're really nerdy and we focus on, and we've even talked about, distilling our own alcohol in the plant to make our own cleaners, so we don't
Mm.
have to, clean with a lot of chemicals. And that's the way that we go about sourcing across the board. And we are working on sourcing more of our own animals. We source, our some of our own pork. um, we get all of our turkey from one farm in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And the other story I'll tell about that is when you formulate pet food for mass market, you have to, so you formulate to have the same ingredients every time, but for meat, you have to kind of roll with the punches of what you get. Like, so your muscle meat might be thigh or it might be breast, right? And then you have to play with two types of meat and sort of blend them to be able to get to the fat ratio you want, right? If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It no, it I mean like food varies in general too with the nutrient, composition you can get. So yeah.
Exactly. So I was at the plant like 2 days ago, and we're about to run turkey, and we actually get a lot of meat from our farmers and producers, and eat it just like we get a lot of cheese from our cheesemaker and that kind of stuff. So we all have this sort of standard in our own lives. And I saw on top of, so all the meat is there, and it's next to the processing room, and it's going into the processing room because we're running turkey. And I saw, like, when you go into like Whole Foods around Thanksgiving and they have these wrapped beautiful whole, like, organic, certified non-GMO pasture raised turkeys that you're
Mm.
paying $1 million for. We had a bunch of those, and I was like, oh, because normally we're taking, like, oh, we have breast and we have this, and so we kind of blend those together. And I was like, are those for people, or are we running those through? And as it turns out, when we get a good price on those are what we put in there for muscle meat.
Oh wow.
Obviously it's a whole bird, so we have the bone in there. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the chicken, we can only right now go maxed, a certain percentage of whole bone. But it the difference between what we're doing and other companies are doing, this is not only better than virtually any human food.
Right.
Um, but it's also real food,
Right.
right? It's
Yeah.
not mechanically separated. It's not. And the last thing I'll kind of highlight, which I think is really cool, which Roxanne kind of highlighted when we were doing our food safety FDA live, was
Mm-hmm.
all of our vegetables are grown by one guy named Samuel who does our who processes our chickens and does he's done all of our kefir up to this point, but actually we just brought someone else on too because as you know, we're growing.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
and
high
and that
demand.
yeah, and that guy actually works at our plant, so he all these people are like totally invested in what we're doing. But
Mm-hmm.
so Samuel grows our vegetables on the farm, and he chops them up and ferments them in these big vats with whey and sea salt. And we actually don't have him completely rinse all of those vegetables, so
Mm.
you get the microbes from the soil in your animal's food.
Mm-hmm.
So there will
It's
be those,
awesome.
soil microbes. And so these are things that, I really think we've and I don't think this is, arrogant to say. I think we've been ahead of the market for a lot of years, and I think
For
we'll
sure.
continue to do that. And not that I can say exactly what it is, but I was just out at the plant doing R&D, which is, my favorite part of my job. Uh, but in some of the new formulas we're working on, we're gonna do stuff that's even weirder and even
Awesome.
even is just gonna be totally different from the market. The one thing I can tell you about, because um, they're going to come onto the market in the next, I would guess, month or two, is we are actually about to release our first bone product,
Oh, cool.
which we're going to release fermented chicken feet.
Mm.
So
That's
those should,
awesome.
and even there, we're doing something that's totally different. For instance, chicken feet. If you go to any website that sells online, food or whatever, food for dogs, you can buy, raw chicken feet.
Right.
What a lot of people don't know, and there's a way to tell, is those actually aren't raw. So if you're buying from a USDA producer, if you don't specifically tell them, it's they scald all those chicken feet, and what that means is they're flash cooking them at 160 degrees.
Got
So
it.
if you're using white chicken feet, those are scalded chicken feet. Now, our chicken feet are going to be very, very vibrant yellow because we convinced our chicken, the people we're getting the chicken from, to just cold wash them. So they're actually raw. You don't have any of the oxidation from the fats, anything like that. And then we'll be fermenting them as well. So we try to do everything to the best of our ability.
Mm-hmm. And so great segue to talk about fermentation
Hmm.
because I feel like a lot of people would see that and be like, well, why do I need a fermented chicken foot for my dog versus, yeah, just something I can cheaply go get at whatever grocery store nearby? So, why? I mean, I feel like fermentation is like, other than sustainability, which is why I wanted to talk about it first, is one of the other like foundations of answers that makes it answers and great and ahead of the game. I totally agree with you. So, why is it such a vital part of the food that you're putting out there for dogs and cats?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the number one thing is food safety.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, the industry is at a very interesting time right now. There's a lot of companies dealing with the FDA, and you know, we're so right now we're working with several uh, consultants, PhD consultants in microbiology, and we're getting we're sort of trying to change the industry and getting a recognized form of food safety. And what that food
Mm.
safety entails is that, right now the FDA runs a zero tolerance policy on bacteria, which doesn't make any
Right.
sense because there is always salmonella in chicken, for instance,
Right.
right?
In
Um,
chicken for human consumption as well. Like it's just there, right?
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's in your stomach right now. It's
Right.
all over your kitchen. It's everywhere. So
Yeah.
it's ubiquitous. So we're working with them because that's not the actual law. The law is it a safety risk? So you
Mhm.
have all these companies that are recalling when they really shouldn't be because the government's telling them that they should. So, but
Right.
that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
So we're trying to run a food safety program, and fermentation is the only way to have the food in a raw food state, but actually put in a safety protocol that works. So HPP, high pressure pasteurization, doesn't even work for one,
Right. Yeah.
but also it makes food not in a raw food state anymore, and that
Mm-hmm.
is completely defeats the purpose. So, we recently got basically we were working with one of our consultants who is not he's not a raw advocate. He doesn't, he's not he essentially knows our other consultant, and he basically wrote the book on listeria for the USDA, and he's a retired professor at Penn State. And we got him to go before the FDA on a conference call and say, look, if they can prove that there are 2 logs higher on lactic acid bacteria than whatever pathogen you find, it's not a food safety risk. So what
Mm.
that means is if we have double the amount of lactic acid bacteria, which we're getting from fermentation, as the pathogen is not going to grow and it's not a food safety risk. So as of right now, we are the only people that are developing a system by which we're not trying to circumvent nature. We're trying to work with it,
Right.
um, using this protocol. And it's gone extremely well. In fact, we just made some changes to our formula to enhance that, in which we actually increase the whey, because the nice thing is we make cheese, so we get all this whey that comes off. There's curds and whey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then um, we also added a very small but effective amount of our kefir for that yeast. And even before that, when we tested our straight product, which is 2% whey, I mean, we were getting at least 2.8 billion probiotics per ounce
Wow.
when you feed it out of the refrigerator. Now, if you were to leave that for 12 hours, our average is 28 billion probiotics per ounce.
Yeah.
So it actually gets safer as it gets
As
healthier. And so,
yeah.
so, and I always tell people, and I spoke on this last year at a summit, you don't want to feed probiotics. You want to feed foods that naturally contain probiotics, and
Mm-hmm.
fermented foods are that. So a lot of people say, how many probiotics does my dog need in a day? They don't. They need foods that contain probiotics naturally.
Right.
So, um, and also too, I mean, so, barring the safety step of fermentation, it just makes the food healthier because it's pre-digested by bacteria. So
Mm-hmm.
even you take, and there's a lot of confusion about this. People are saying, do you ferment the meat? Do you not ferment the meat? So we're inoculating that food with several different sources. We inoculate it with our fermented vegetables. We ferment it with our fermented cod livers, which have been fermented for a year, and we ferment it with our whey. And that, all of those things contain, proteolytic cultures that affect protein. They contain all these different, hundreds of different species of cultures, which is an overall ferment to affect the entire product. So that's really the process. So
Mm-hmm.
technically, if you let it get up to room temperature, all of those lactic acid bacteria, are dividing every like 12 minutes or something. So you're going to get more as it sits. But even if you feed it out of the fridge, I did some numbers looking at our data, and for a 30-pound dog per meal, I did a base diet of, our food plus kefir plus fish stock, and that dog was getting at least 30 billion probiotic species, or I'm sorry, 30 billion probiotics in over 200 different species.
Wow. That's that's crazy.
Sorry, that was a huge mouthful. I went on for a while there. Sorry.
No, 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 no. That's great because I think fermentation is something that is kind of confusing for people
Hmm.
because it's newer to being more in the public eye in a sense. And, that I think what I like about fermentation and what you said about, how you put it all together essentially with the different types of foods and what's been fermented and things like that is ultimately you're putting together foods that are working together to have better, like you said, bacteria in them that even can grow from there. So it's really cool to see that you're putting together these different elements of foods that are living and sustainable and can work together with the dog and how these dogs process food because and cats I keep missing out on cats but I'm more dog
We
focused so
no, we love. I don't have a cat either, but we love cats.
yeah
So
so
it's no, I think you're totally right. It is really, when people talk about living food, I mean, this is like, you know, I a lot of people, some people are surprised to learn this, but since I homebrew kombucha and
Mm-hmm.
I'll make raw yogurt for my wife and that kind of thing. I actually buy my fermented vegetables, and because oddly enough, sometimes I don't want to talk about fermentation. I just want to like buy something, but there's this really great brand in Southern California, and uh, it's an interesting ferment. They actually ferment it with lemon juice,
Oh,
so
huh.
you're getting these cultures in there, but it's really cool because when I first open it, it literally is bubbling out of the top of it
That's
because it's
awesome.
alive.
Yeah.
So these are the foods that can really go a long way in affecting, especially fermented dairy is the number one, but
Mm-hmm.
is foods that can really affect your animal's diet in a big way.
Well, and so I think I know what your answer is going to be to this next question, but it's it's basically, with all your experience, like before even answers, when you were home cooking for your dog and balancing diets that way, what do you feel is the one thing that if everybody who's listening to this went out there tomorrow and did for their pet's nutrition, what would that be?
Well, you definitely know the answer.
I think I know, but
And so that is simply fermented raw dairy, being in
mhm.
any form. I mean, we make fermented. Well, all cheese is fermented, so we make raw cheese that we're only warming to 98 degrees.
Mhm.
And I mean, when you make raw cheese is one of the healthiest foods on earth, and so you're dealing with what is basically raw milk in solid form. And we've started to work with health conditions with cheese for dogs that won't drink milk, and are getting a lot of the same results. And so even if people think I can't wrap my head around raw milk for animals, I can't wrap my head around raw diet, they love feeding their dog cheese. So at
Mm.
least do that. And this is, a way to get viable probiotics into the diet, but definitely fermented raw dairy just generally. So either our fermented raw kefir or our fermented raw goat's milk, or I don't know, if you live in a state, which is very few and far between, where you can go to a store like in California, I can go to the store, I can buy raw butter, I can buy raw milk,
Mhm.
um, but most states are not like that. And
Yeah.
so if you can get your own and ferment it, then do that. But you know, raw milk is, as you would imagine. I mean, the quick version is it's the most complete food on the planet. It's the most easily digested food on the planet. And when you ferment it, you take that and make it even more efficient. We've had animals live for years off just raw milk with certain health conditions and completely thrive. So I would say at some point in my dog's life, she will be drinking, if not a majority of her calories as milk as she gets older. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that is probably one of my favorite things to feed my guys, all my dogs, is the answers raw milk kefir specifically. Saying it's one of the most complete foods you can feed. I know it gets complicated because of
hmm
science and everything, so maybe talk briefly a little bit more about that though.
yeah. I mean, yeah, well, to simplify it, you just have to think about it in these terms. And first of all, the kefir is easily one of my favorite products as well, just because that is the best kefir in the world in
Mhm.
terms of how it's produced. I mean, we all of that is produced by Samuel. Even he'll still do the fermenting even when I think the other guy's name is John, but when he comes on board to provide more milk for us. But that kefir, it's 100% grass fed. You're talking about, we actually, to get a diversity of cultures, we get Kefir grains, which are not grains. They're, they look like grains, but it's kind of like a little blob of bacteria and yeast, which is what ferments it. We get Kefir grains from California, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to get the different wild yeast
Mm.
that may be present. We Our other farmer, Steve, who makes our fish stock and turkey stock, starts all of those cultures for us, and he starts them all separately, and then we combine them to start that actual ferment in the thing. So
Got
again,
it.
a lot of people will never even know that, but we do it because we're incredibly anal. Um, so we're working with those. So that kefir, and it's only warm to 80 degrees, so
Mm.
it's totally raw, and that's why you get that wonderful consistency.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so
it's
great. I love it.
and so the raw milk is the only, if you look at it from like a biology perspective, it's made to be food to sustain another mammal completely.
Mhm.
So it is more biodiverse. I would say when we've looked at how it sustains animals and how it prevents nutritional deficiencies, I would go one step further and not say it's one of the most complete foods. It's the most complete food.
Mhm.
So it's not only made to be it's made to sustain another mammal, so it virtually has everything we've ever discovered, but also it's made to be food. So all those nutrients work in correlation better, and it digests very, very quickly.
Right.
And also, a lot of people don't know about milk is one third of it is actually undigestible to your dog or cat. Now, a lot of people would say, "Why? That doesn't make any sense if it's made to be food."
Mm.
But it's because one third of it is digestible by the bacteria that are contained within it. So
Ah.
that is why, a lot of people get obsessed with numbers when it comes to probiotics.
Yeah.
I don't care about numbers. I care about living probiotics that are in a food environment, and that is why raw dairy is such an effective probiotic. So it has food for itself contained within itself. I mean,
Yeah. That's
these are
crazy.
yeah, these are things that don't exist in nature outside of few foods. I mean,
Mhm.
I would say if I was putting together a list of the number one things that a dog should eat for better health is raw dairy, eggs, fermented fish, and organ meat.
Mm. Mhm.
And those would be uh, my list of healthiest foods that any dog or cat can put a lot of in their diet to avoid that. And so, um, but yeah, um, we've gotten good data back on even specific nutrients, but I don't really love focusing on specific nutrients because, you know, when you calculate bioavailability into it, when you look at the testing of specific nutrients and how that works and how it's not very reliable, even
Mhm.
in food, testing what's in food, testing what's in your dog, you know, as I've spoken about a lot, um, I really think that if you're making especially a homemade diet, that people should be adding the recommended daily amount of our fermented raw dairy to
Mhm.
minimize nutritional deficiencies. In fact, I'll give you two things. If you're making a homemade diet, use our fermented raw dairy and use our fermented fish stock. If you use both of those things in the recommended daily amounts, you're going to go a long way in avoiding deficiencies. And I'm all about people making their own diets.
Yeah.
We make a diet for the majority of people because the majority of people don't want to make it a homemade diet.
Right.
So that's who we service. There is I as you can imagine, because I am involved in the formulation of the food, feed a lot of Answers products, but I also do my own thing as well in terms of adding different things and playing around
Mhm.
with things because that's kind of my hobby. I'm that nerdy that my hobby is
Yeah.
feeding my dog outside of what we're talking about. But, you know, so I'm all about people making a homemade diet, but in adding these reproductive foods, if you add the recommended daily dose of either of our milk products, rotating between them probably better, and then our fish stock, it'd be pretty hard to, if you're going off a proven recipe from someone like yourself or someone, it would be pretty hard to have a deficiency at that point.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with you, and anytime I do homemade diets, whether it's for my dogs or for somebody else, a client, one of the biggest things that I talk about are probiotics and, recommending your food as that, because whether it's the kefir or the fish stock, because it is so great for these dogs. I mean, instead of feeding them random treats, give them that. Like, give them the kefir as the treat, uh, because they're just going to get so much more benefit from it.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, I think, again, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, it's the reason why, we have a wonderful marketing person now who I work very closely with, in terms of messaging and stuff.
Hmm.
But for many, many years, we had a terrible website and we had, you know, no marketing budget whatsoever. And, you know, we grew exponentially across the country and it's because it works. I
Hmm.
mean, it's sort of like raw in general. A lot of veterinarians will say, well, the potential for your dog to get sick is very high. Well,
Right.
clearly dogs are not getting sick at a high rate because
Right.
if dogs were getting sick, people wouldn't use the food. So
Exactly.
it's clearly not been an issue, and we know that because we can just look at the industry itself growing. And
It's
so
doing the opposite. It's fixing a lot of these dogs' issues. So, yeah.
exactly. And again, that kind of goes back to when people say, well, my veterinarian doesn't want me to do answers. I
Mm-hmm.
always just say to people, there's veterinarians who think answers is dangerous. There's veterinarians that carry answers in their office.
Right.
You just have to decide what you want to do. And again, our tagline, we're one of the only companies without any salespeople. And
Mm.
our tagline is just, listen, it's the best thing. If you want to do it, great. If you don't, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
No, I love that because I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to, with any
yeah,
of this that when it comes to your dog. So, but the proof is in your ability as a company to continue to grow like crazy.
yeah. Well, it's
So,
it's it's like we're trying to slow down the growth,
I know,
and
yeah.
it's wild the amount we've grown probably in the last 2 years. And we opened up a plant, which is most raw foods are actually not produced. They're not producing them. They're made in a plant, which is totally fine.
Hmm.
But we wanted to have control over that, and so
Yeah.
we opened up a plant, and that's a whole nother business.
Oh, I'm sure.
A lot of people think like, oh, you just open a plant and then there's already a blueprint for how to produce food, which couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, it
Hmm.
took us 6, 8 months to be able to produce a decent amount of food in the plant, and there you're paying workers, you're doing all this stuff, and I give 1,000% credit to my boss Jacqueline, who's one of the owners of the company. Her and her sister were out at the plant working 12-hour days every day producing the food for,
Mm.
8 months. And
Hmm.
um, so that was kind of but it's a necessary step in terms of
Right.
our protecting ourselves and producing the best possible product.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I know that, and we don't have to get into the whole FDA, like, I'm going to call it a stupid recall thing that
Hmm.
happened. But I want people to definitely, because I know you've talked about it a lot and you just did like a live video on your Facebook, and I think people should really go there to learn more all about it. But there was no recall ultimately. A lot of drama for nothing, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's actually good you bring it up because this is not the last you're going to hear about
Right. Yeah, that's
anything in
true.
regards to us or other companies. We've been dealing with them since, a lot of people say like, "Oh, this happened then, now it's over." It's definitely not over,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been dealing with them for several months in them coming into our plant, literally with military people in uniform.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and this is again, we've never made anyone sick.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't recall products, because we can say, "Oh, look, we tested that beef that, was supposed to have pathogens in it, and it had the highest amount of probiotic or lactic acid bacteria that we've ever tested in a food product. So of course it's not going to make someone sick. So of course we're not going to recall the product." And so, the nice thing is, um, a lot of, whenever you see a recall, people are voluntarily doing it, but they're told that they have to voluntarily do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I happen to work for people who want to do the right thing at great cost to themselves. I mean, this is taking 100% of some of the people who work for the company. Most of the people, most of the people who are owners in the company are dealing with this every day, all day.
I'm sure.
So we were all out there recently, last week, and I was like looking at Coco, our marketing person. I'm like, okay, they need to do this. We need to run the business,
Yeah.
you
My
know.
God.
And so some of the stuff I can't go into because of legal stuff.
Yeah.
But if some of the stuff ever comes out from and I think it will, but some of the stuff ever comes out for the lies we've caught them in, the things that they've said, and specific people and some actions that were taken, it will blow people away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most people think like, oh, government agencies are just enforcing the law. That couldn't be further from the truth. So we're
I
gonna we're
believe
gonna
it, unfortunately.
so we're going to stand our ground and continue to work with them and say, look, zero tolerance is not a thing. It
Mm.
doesn't actually work. We need fairness in how this testing is going. It shouldn't be all directed towards the raw category. Um, and we're going to continue to have safe food. And when you want us to recall a product that is not unsafe, because, um, you know, that's one of the things that, so they don't have much power in terms of, if you're not releasing an unsafe product, aka a product that's not made someone sick, they can't really do much in terms of forcing a recall or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But what they can do is release those letters and try to discredit you.
Got it.
So all we're going to do is say, hey, every time you release a letter, we're just going to say, no worry, here's why it's not unsafe scientifically,
Right.
and we're moving on from it. So I think people appreciate that kind of fresh take on it.
Totally. No, I agree, and I stand with you guys, like, firsthand, because my dog it's done nothing, your products have done nothing but make her life better. So it's so silly, and unfortunately, yeah, a waste of resources on your guys' ends, because you have to dedicate so much time to this. But thank you for standing up for it, because I think you're doing so much more to benefit the raw food industry, by taking this approach, and basically being the better person in the situation, the better company, and rising above it and looking at it scientifically and showing the facts and saying, listen, this is what's actually happening, and continuing on, moving forward. That's what you should be doing, and I appreciate it as a customer and a supporter. So,
Well, you're welcome, and we appreciate the support. You don't like paying lawyers $850 an hour?
God, yeah,
I was
I'm
like,
sure.
I'm in the wrong business. I need to get
Right.
paid that much. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, we all should have
Um,
been lawyers for sure. So to wrap up, though, let's talk about your dog, and it's Lua, right?
yes.
Okay. So what makes her the happiest? Is it her food or what?
She's pretty aloof. She's one of the most. She never plays with toys. She doesn't play that often, and it's not because she's 12. She's always been that way, which I kind of love, because she was like, I'll happily go on a walk, but
Mm-hmm.
I could not walk her for 2 or 3 days, and you're not going to notice really a difference in her behavior.
Yeah.
Um, so two things make her happy. The first one, as you'd imagine, is food. I
Right.
mean, she goes crazy. She's a pug, and so she goes insane for food. And the second thing would be my wife, which is kind of disappointing, because I had this dog for 9 years before they met,
Oh my
and
God.
now she will choose. I was just gone from Lua for like a week and a half, and I'm staying at my parents right now, and she's sitting in a chair with Emily, who she's been with the whole time, just because she prefers her. So I was like, I'm glad I could be a conduit for you two to like meet,
Right.
eventually.
Right.
But
You brought
so
them together, really, was your purpose.
exactly, and I'm still the one who feeds her every day.
Oh
So
my God.
it's one of those things. But I say this a lot when I speak, but she is the whole reason for my career. I
Mm-hmm.
never knew anything about dogs, had a dog growing up or anything like that, and so I really get to do something that I love every single day, and I have her to thank for that. So
That's awesome. And did you adopt her then, or how
no,
did you get
so
her?
and hope you don't catch much flack from this, but
No.
keep in mind, when I got a dog, I didn't have a dog growing up and didn't know how
Mm-hmm.
to get a dog, didn't know anything like that. So I purchased her from a pet store,
Got it.
which I recommend people do not do.
Yeah.
After finding out what the gist was, I feel like karma wise, I'm on a good level, because I after that I found out where those dogs come from, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a fundraiser in Milwaukee, and I raised more money than it cost to adopt Lua, which is a lot at a pet store, or to
Yeah.
buy Lua.
Yeah.
And then I donated that to an organization that stops puppy mills. So I
That's
figure
awesome.
I wouldn't change it, because I love her,
Yeah.
but yeah. So genetically, I think she benefits a ton from from the food. I can't even imagine what she'd be like if she wasn't my dog.
Yeah. No, totally. And that's one of those things where you it's great that you're the type of person who, like, looked into this, with her and her
Mhm.
background, instead of just kind of turning a blind eye, because I think that's unfortunately what happens when a lot of people buy a dog, instead of going to the shelter, because you're not faced with like a dog sitting in a cage right in front of you type thing. And so
Yeah.
the fact that you looked into it more and, you weren't going to take it as face value and you wanted to figure it out and are now someone who says don't buy a dog from a pet store, I think that's great. I frankly think that that's a great story to tell, and 9 years ago was a lot different than now too. So
Yeah, well, and it's kind of like, it's sort of analogous to, for instance, someone who feeds like only a processed diet. It's like
mhm.
they just didn't know any better, but once you get
Right.
the information, you do the best with the information you have. So, like
Exactly.
I said, I wouldn't change it, but I obviously won't be buying my next dog from a pet store.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's all I need to hear then. Cuz I'm into rescue, but
Yeah.
so where can people find answers online? And I
Yeah.
know you can
So
search for stores near on your website. Go over that.
Yeah, so we're found at, answerspetfood.com. We're only sold in brick and mortar stores right now. We are working. We're obviously. I know people get kind of mad at us because we always say we're working on a retailer friendly e-commerce program for
Mhm.
ordering from us. But uh, people don't typically understand that that's not easy. And then also we have things like the FDA stuff we just talked about, and
Right.
we have things like just produce. People don't even know how hard it is just to produce the food itself, right?
Right.
Just
Yeah.
to get it on the market. And so we are working on that. But right now you can search. We're purchasable at fine local retailers across the country. They're all no big box, huge stores or anything like that.
Mhm.
We have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Answers Academy, we try to get a new class on there every month. Right now, we're going through our health guide, um, and so you can look there. Those classes you can learn, I think, a lot from. And then uh, we also have a blog that's answersbeyondthebowl.com where we kind of post some information there as well. So we try to get as much information and education out as possible.
Awesome. Well, I will link all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge, sharing your knowledge, most importantly. And I'm sure people want to have you on again. So uh, thank you again.
Absolutely, anytime, no problem.
If you enjoyed this episode with Billy, be sure to share it on your social media with all your dog loving friends. And we are on Instagram, so follow the Happy Dog Podcast on Instagram. We'll see you next time.